A while ago, I did a survey online about interviews, asking how many people had experienced going for a job interview and never hearing back. The results were shocking because for most people that had happened, but for many it had happened a lot. I think it's such a bad look for a company when that happens. But I also think it should tell you as a candidate whether that was someone that you really want to work for. If they can't be bothered to notify you after an interview when you've given up your time, then maybe you dodged a bullet and you're better off elsewhere. It's like a combination of ghosting and gaslighting. I call it ghostlighting. They're telling you that you're worthy of being considered for a role, but not worthy enough to be told after the interview whether you've got it. People can wait weeks, months to find out, and some never get told that they've missed out. It's just one of the things that can impact your mental health when job searching. I'm David Spencer, and welcome to the Media Mentor podcast. The draining aspect to the job hunt is just one of the things that I help clients with. Having someone to talk to and be supported by can really make the whole thing just a little less lonely and demoralizing. Over the last 20 years, I've helped hundreds of people with their careers, and on this podcast, I want to help you too by sharing advice and guidance on how to progress. On this episode, we welcome back Teo for questions related to the first few episodes of the series, and managing your mental health and rejection is one of the key topics. Teo, thank you for joining me again for an episode to catch up with hopefully lots of things you've learned, but also questions from you from the episodes so far, questions from people I've met, some that I've been teaching, some that I've been speaking to about the podcast, and some really interesting points about the podcast too, but also questions that people have got in touch with online. And please do that. If you're listening, thank you very much. If you've been listening to every episode of the podcast, if there are things that you'd like to know more about, things you don't think we've covered, then get in touch via all the normal places and ask us a question. Teo, I think you've got a question from the AI episode.
Yes. So I remember when I was listening back to it that your guest was talking about shaping and making your CV look very, very unique. But then I remember when I was talking to you that you said that's not the case. Then which one is the real answer?
Well, I think that's a good point, because I even said in that interview that surprised me a bit, because we're learning how AI is being used in recruitment. I think from a practical level, you have to find the jobs, you have to write a cover letter, and then we've got your CV, and now AI is suggesting that we have to make the CV unique for every job, which some people believe in anyway. I've always just felt there's enough that you have to do, that doing the CV as well is a bit unrealistic. And I think there's a balance with it in that for each job, your CV needs to say a few of the key things, like at the top, the title needs to be relatively connected to the job that you're going for. Also, the statement can be adjusted to fit some of the key skills that might be requested. And the experience that you have in your CV, whether that's your employment history or maybe skills and other stuff, maybe education, has to really fit with the job you're going for. So in a way, I'm saying, yes, just make sure it ticks everything it should do for the job. But I don't think you should rewrite your CV for every job. I think the point on that episode, Joe said you need to get through AI. It's seeing too many generic CVs, and to stand out, maybe doing different stuff with your CV and saying some of those key words in different ways would make a difference.
But I'm still confused about something because, for example, every time when I go and look at a job and I read their requirements or the things they're looking for, not all of them have the same thing. Not all of them are looking for you to have the same set of skills that the other two jobs you looked before had. And I was wondering, what am I doing in that case? Because I know every CV is put through this like AI system, and it's filtered with everything. They're looking for the keywords that you have to include, and then because your previous CV didn't had necessarily those key requirement words they're looking for, What do you do in that case?
Well, I think it's hard to know sometimes what those keywords might always be. It could be obvious, but it might actually be harder sometimes to work that out. But my point is that to some degree, we know that there's a scoring system with that. So ATS or AI, automated systems or AI, basically trying to sift through hundreds of CVs to score the highest. So in a sense, it makes sense to try and make your CV match what that job advert will say as much as possible. I still think for the number of jobs that some people are applying to, that's really hard because there may be a cover letter as well. And the cover letter really should be the place where you are being distinct, particularly distinct, and where you can put a bit more of the interesting stuff in. But I would also say that I think you need to grade the job you're going for. So if you're a bit confused about the job spec, but for example, I said, yes, that's definitely a job you should go for, it's a job that really interests you, then make it a category A job where you do all of these things. You work a bit harder on your CV and the cover letter. If it's category B, it's less perfect, but it's good. Again, slightly less effort. Category C, a little bit more throwaway, maybe an easy apply. Just to ease the burden, because at the heart of this is the draining, exhausting nature of the job hunt. And my view is that's why I say don't change your CV for every job, because I just think it's hard enough as it is already without doing that. But in terms of Joe's thinking, some of those systems are looking for distinct bits of info in a CV. So sort of answered your question. You've got to try and decide which ones you do that for and which jobs you don't, because otherwise you're doing 100% effort on 100% of the jobs you go for. You're not sleeping. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. So basically, to sum up, you just need to prioritize the jobs that you're applying for, the one that you're the most drawn to.
Yeah, drawn to, and I would add suited for. And I think that's also one of the questions we've been asked is how do you know what jobs you're suited for? And that's very hard when you're starting out. It's actually quite hard later on too. And a bit of advice helps with that, to hear from people, because job titles can vary and it can sound senior when it's not senior, or it can sound junior when it's not junior. And so I think really reading that job description well and trying to understand that makes you go, yes, I can do all of those things. It doesn't ask for 3 years experience. So if it's a good fit, it appeals to you and the spec feels doable. Just remember, Teo, you're not going to be 100% right for any job.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people think you have to score 100%. No one's perfect that way. So if you're hitting about 80% of the points in there, I think that's pretty good, and you should go for it if it's a job that appeals.
Earlier you were talking about how do I know which job is the best for me. This is a question I was keep thinking about for a very, very long time, and I'm still trying to find an answer, because how can I figure it out, especially when you just started in this career, you just want to get into the career and to get into the industry. How do we know what's the best fit for us?
I was trying to think of an analogy as you were asking that question, but it is like meeting people and finding partners and people that we're either going to live with and spend the rest of our life with, or just group of friends. You don't know till you kind of meet them and chat. And I think when you start out, a lot of times students and graduates are kind of thinking the first job is got to be the bullseye. It could actually be really not the bullseye and completely not right, but tell you just as much as if it's the right job. So you're not going to find out what is a good fit until you start doing some of the jobs. So people that start off doing some social media stuff but actually think, well, I'm not really that interested in social. I've realized I'm much more interested in the journalism, and I'm doing a bit more journalism here. Or in that role, I did a bit of podcast production and I really enjoyed that. So until you start doing those things, those questions don't get answered. It's partly what the MA is for, because you get to do lots of different things. So you start to answer some of those questions. But the workplace is very different. And again, the idea that you're a perfect fit for somewhere is just the same as no job is a perfect fit for you at the start. No job is a bad decision to do in media. If you can get in doing something, then that will help. And the other way that people find the answer to that, Theo, is actually by freelancing. So many people start out by doing a few shifts here, a few shifts there, different types of work, different types of organization, and they get lots of answers to those questions by doing that because they go, I don't really enjoy being a production journalist. I much prefer doing something a little bit more creative with journalism, reporting maybe. So that's a good way to discover what really fits, is by freelancing and getting into the industry.
I notice there are a lot of jobs out there. Every time when I go on different websites and I look for, I notice there are a lot of jobs that are closing earlier than they're supposed to. And I was wondering why is that the case? I mean, my first thought was, because probably they found someone or because they reached their limit, like thousands of people applied for. But not in all cases. For example, one of them can have a super early date saying like, we're going to close it in a week time or 3 days. And others are like 3-4 months and they're still there, active.
Yeah, it's really confusing. Typically, a job gets listed and it's open for 10 to 14 days. Lots of jobs, as we know, don't have a closing date. Those that do can close early for the reason you specified. Too many applicants already. I was once at a place where we advertised a job and within 2 days, 350 people had applied. We knew we couldn't look through that many anyway, so they closed the job. Sometimes a job opens, has a short date before it closes, 3 days it might be open. That's probably an internal appointment. They have to advertise the job externally, but they've already got someone in mind. So the job will close very quickly. And to your point about the closing date, firstly, can shift and therefore, you can miss out if you wait. You don't wait till the closing date to apply for a job. Never do that. It's too risky for the reasons we just mentioned. Some companies are very good at sticking to it, but a lot it can slip. And the reason is, as soon as the applications start going in, as soon as the job is advertised, someone is vetting those applications. So to your point, they could have found someone or they could find a really strong candidate in the early applicants. But they won't have chosen someone and interviewed someone and hired someone in the space of a week, 2 weeks. That won't have happened. But the danger is if you're not in there early enough, the job can close or you're going to get ignored because you were 250 and beyond. Bit like again, Joe said in the AI episode, if you're towards the end of the time in the application period, your CV is not getting looked at, and that's not fair.
There is one thing that I've always struggled with, and that's the first bit in the CV, which is sometimes called as a personal statement or a personal overview or just a few lines describing who you are and what you do. I've always wondered how can we make that one look better?
Well, again, this is where I'm different to many people, because a lot of people say don't bother with it. But I think don't bother with it if it says, I'm a recently graduated journalist who aspires to write journalism that changes the world and uncovers
the truth.
Yes, exactly. And it'd be full eye roll reading that and go, great. Or I'm passionate about da-da-da-da-da. If it's generic, it's not doing anything, don't include it. But if it says, as a BJTC qualified journalist, my experience already includes covering this news story, that news story, producing content in multimedia formats for social, for TV, for radio, for podcast, interviewing these people, covering this story, as well as my university work. I also worked on a podcast about mentoring and media careers. Make the statement a bit more like a biography. Often it's a mission statement. So for a graduate, it will be like, I want to do this, and I don't care what you want to do. I'm interested in what you've done. And if it's a good, assertive 120-word statement that sums up your sort of life, and it can be stuff away from media. It might say, I also spend weekends working in a food bank. There's no problem saying that because it makes you a little bit different. It's a little bit more human. So it can be personal. And you sort of said when you asked the question, this personal statement, sometimes it's called this. Really, the title can be quite misleading, and I just call it a statement. But sometimes people think it's a statement of intent.
Now, my last question when it comes to CVs, it's about references. I know some of them are asking for and some of them aren't. And when I was looking through some of my friends' CVs, I noticed that some of them had at the very end of the CV references. And my question is actually two questions in one. The first one will be how relevant they are. And the second one, how do we know who to choose to be our referring person? Because sometimes I heard stories that the person they called, it wasn't vouching for them that well, and there was all sorts of weird situations happening.
Well, I think that's bad, obviously, if that happens. So I'll answer the second bit first. Who you choose, if you're going for media work, generally 2 media references, typically. So obviously a lecturer, in your case, someone you've worked with in media perhaps could be a reference. But you have 2 or 3 people you know you could ask, but they also know that they're going to be asked. So you ask people if it's okay if there'll be a reference.
Okay.
So that's one thing to get round the issue that you just described. But you can sometimes have a personal reference. So if you've known someone for a long time, they can be a personal reference. So there's 2 slightly different types of reference. So you have people that you've worked with and or recently been taught by, and then you might have a personal reference. What I would say about the CV is you don't put them on. If the company wants them, they will have a portal like the BBC does where they ask you to put all that information in and you put the contact details in there. I did an application recently where I asked about references and I had to put them in the portal. They're not on my CV. And I don't even say references on request. If you haven't got references on request, that would be weird because that means no one's going to vouch for you in your word. So always tell the people that you're going to use them as references or ask them if they would be a reference for you, firstly. And then choose those people that might have slightly different backgrounds. So you don't want 2 lecturers from the same course. You might have your undergrad and your MA, or you might have people that you've worked with or done voluntary work with. So have a bit of a variation. And you do update them over time because CVs get held on record and obviously people move on from jobs and things like that. So, but generally don't put it on your CV. Don't even put references on request. You don't need to.
Okay, noted. Now, moving on a bit, I'm thinking about rejection a lot. And I'm wondering, how do you usually help clients with rejection?
Well, I think that's such an important question and very difficult because I'm there to support to try and make the applications more successful and ultimately for people to land a job. And I think you have to treat rejections in a couple of ways. So if you're not hearing anything, which is often the case when clients first come to me, so it's like, I'm not getting any feedback. Leonie's episode talked about the fact she's applying for jobs, she wasn't hearing, so she didn't know what she was doing wrong, just didn't understand. So that's really difficult. But in that case, well, the CV wasn't very good and it needed some work, but it might also just be that recruitment isn't great and it's not about you, it's about the companies. So you can't take rejection too personally. I think that's hard because I take it very personally and I think it's a very natural thing to do. But if you're applying for lots of jobs, the other thing you can do is, for example, you've had a wall of silence and then suddenly you get an invite for an interview. And then you start imagining doing that job and you imagine saying yes to that job. All you've got to is an interview. And so we can get a bit ahead of ourselves. And also what happens in that scenario is you switch off to other applications. So you've got an interview and you think, well, I've got an interview, I've got this job, I'm going to focus on getting the interview right in a week's time. And then you don't see any of the jobs that are listed in that next period of week. And it could be the perfect job to just come up, but you stop looking because you've got an interview. So don't put all your eggs in one basket in that sense. You got an interview, do the best you can, wait for any issues in your head. I wasn't sure about the job. I don't know if I like the person that interviewed me. Don't worry about any of that until they offer you the job. And then you've got a decision to make. But I think often we get a bit ahead of ourselves. We really overinvest in an opportunity and get our hopes up. And then we also think rejections are all about us. And they're not really. Often rejections are much more about the recruiter than they are about you. The system's a bit flawed. They haven't seen your CV. You just missed out. You applied 10 days into the period of the job being advertised, and they've already looked at enough CVs. So I think you have to try and put it in perspective. But honestly, Teo, it's hard. And I think in your case, the sort of idea of rejection is also something that can be a bit of a barrier.
That's true. It can be. I think the first thought I had was, am I even such a good journalist as I think I am? And I realize it's not always about yourself, but as you said, it's also about what happens in that world.
In that process, yeah.
Yes, and but of course in that moment you don't think about that. The first thing that comes to your mind is it's yourself. The question that I still have and the fear that I still have, I had such a long period of the time when I wasn't doing much, when I wasn't the best. Is it still worth it? As in, not is it still worth it, but more, am I still fit to do that? Do you know what I mean?
Well, you know what I'm going to say.
Okay, yeah.
Which is yes. But at the moment, being honest, the number of jobs you've applied for over the last 4 to 6 weeks is?
0.
So at the moment, you're not knocking on any doors. So I get the build up to it, and I think that's really tough because you don't know. But it could be that a couple of years ago, you come from your undergrad and you might be sending that 6-7 page CV. You might have been sending that out. That's not going to get you a job because no one's looking at that, and you're thinking everyone needs to know everything I've ever done. You said that to me in one of the episodes because all of this experience I want to tell everyone. They don't want to know. They want to know in a page why you're fit for the job. And so it could be that something very practical needs to be fixed. And that's not your fault. That's nothing to do with your skills. So it's speaking to someone who might know. That's a first start point. And of course I'm going to say that because I think a lot of what I say makes sense and I've helped a lot of people make progress. I don't think it necessarily helps to say to people it's not about you, it's about them, because you're still being rejected.
Yeah.
So I think all the processes we talk about, put the building blocks in place, make your applications as best as possible, listen to some of the advice that's out there, listen to the episodes of the podcast, try and do those practical things right. Try and find the jobs that really do suit you in areas that interest you but might not be perfect. And take a dip, put your toes in. Teo, thank you so much for those questions and that really interesting discussion. Anything that doesn't make sense, anything you think's contradictory, contrary that I say, things that have mystified you, from closing dates to what should I put in a CV, how should I do an interview, any questions you have like that, please get in touch and let me know what you find particularly mystifying about the job hunt process and job applications. Do get in touch.
I think what Teo touched on at the end there is so important to address. Rejection is tough. If you get an interview and you just miss out, maybe told by the company that you were a really strong candidate, but you just missed out to someone else, that's gutting. But at least you know. The radio silence from job applications is almost harder to deal with, as we heard Leonie describe in episode 7. So please be kind to yourself and don't let that beat you. Listen to the advice and some of those key tips from today's episode, for example, and I really believe that your chances of breaking that radio silence increase. That's it for this latest episode. If you'd like to find out more about my mentoring, then get in touch via themediamentor.info. One-to-one sessions are held online and confidential. For the latest media jobs, you can visit my website. Plus, we have the WhatsApp channel where all the jobs I find get shared as they drop. Details of that in the pod description. Thanks again to Teo for her questions and for being so honest. And thank you too if you've been in touch to ask me something. As ever, thanks also to Mrs. Mentor for managing the job pages, and also sound designer and music composition genius Josh Sommer, who wrote my theme music. Thank you for listening, and remember to click follow on your podcast player to keep up to date with the latest episodes, and please write a review if you've enjoyed the podcast.